We're going to move kind of on the demand side, kind of into my world. Those of you that were here this morning, I showed a slide from EIA that kind of showed the demand growth projections for residential, commercial, industrial, power generation, and some of those new emerging markets. We're going to touch on some more of those now. I'll provide some remarks regarding the power generation market, which is pretty exciting for natural gas. Some of the renaissance that's happening in the industrial markets that we're also pretty excited about. And then my colleagues on the panel will talk about combined heat and power and some of the exciting stuff going on in the transportation market. So that's kind of where we're headed on this panel. You all have seen a lot of maps, I know. This one seems to be cut off a little bit, but certainly, you know, a couple of things I think about with the shale plays. You know, one is how geographically diverse they are. It seems like they just kind of keep popping up everywhere. And you know, the whole idea of having natural gas in the market area is pretty neat. Particularly me being an infrastructure guy. You know, you start thinking about pipelines backwards from the way you normally think about it. I used to work for Tennessee Gas Pipeline when I was with El Paso, and you know, the Marcellus Shale just kind of showed up right under Tennessee Gas, and it was just kind of a really fun time to be in business development, because you're thinking about, you know, your pipe used to flow this way, and now you got supply where you built the pipe to serve. So now what do we do? You know, so it's led to a lot of expansions and a lot of growth on the infrastructure side. I know we have an infrastructure panel later, and I apologize for the slide, but I can make some of the points here. Actually, this whole thing's technology experts know how to fix that. Scott, help. You don't want me to be like that. Okay, much better. Sorry about that. So these are new numbers from the Potential Gas Committee, and I'll talk about this more on the next slide too, but the numbers just continue to grow in terms of estimates of the resource base for gas. So you're up to over 1,000 trillion cubic feet now, just from shale. And this is updated from just 2 years ago from PGC. And a total now, when you include all natural gas, of nearly 2,400 TCF. So just in 2 years, we're up 26%. So pretty impressive. And here you see kind of the growth in the Potential Gas Committee numbers on the left. You can see each time they come out with a new update, it just kind of continues to grow. It's up about 500 TCF just in 2 years. And when you look at that and you kind of look at some of the other sources that are out there, including the EIA, which is kind of notoriously conservative on this sort of thing, even they're over 2,000 TCF. So I think the message is there's a lot of gas out there. And that's why we're so excited about the demand opportunities. The other thing that's kind of changed in natural gas is price volatility. You know, historically, natural gas has been the second most volatile commodity behind just electricity. And it wasn't that long ago that when you had a hurricane come through the Gulf of Mexico, you saw a pretty significant price impact of the Henry Hub. I remember when Katrina and Rita came through and it took a lot of offshore gas offline. This was really before shale. So it made a pretty material difference in terms of supply availability. And you saw $12, $13 gas at Henry Hub. And that's before you deliver it to markets like this one. So what we've seen post-shale is a hurricane like Ike that came through and also took out a lot of Gulf of Mexico production, but didn't really make a material difference at the Henry Hub price. So what you see from EIA is just the last 4 years of their projections of prices going out to 2040. And you see a range now that's kind of in the $4 to $6, maybe $7 range for the foreseeable future. So we think that's kind of a price point that's sustainable for the industry. And when I say that, I mean it works for the producer, it works for the customer, it really works for all of the demand growth markets that we're going to talk about today, and some of the ones we touched on already. So this is right in line with what we think works well for the industry. But really more importantly than just this long-term forecast is the volatility forecast, because you're just not going to have the same kind of volatility anymore in natural gas prices that you used to have. Now, it's true, in some areas where there are pipeline constraints, you'll still see price spikes. Certainly in the Northeast this past winter on some of the coldest days, we saw some pretty high-priced natural gas. But it wasn't because there wasn't enough supply. It's because there weren't enough pipelines to deliver the supply to where it was needed. So we're working as an industry to remedy that problem, but that's really the only kind of price spikes that we see happening in the foreseeable future. Okay, power generation. This is becoming a bigger and bigger market for natural gas. If you look at the United States, this is kind of the electricity mix. So this is gigawatt hours generated around the country from the different kind of fuels that are out there. And a couple of things that you really notice is the natural gas is growing. We're approaching 30% now of total power generation. I think you heard from Katie with the MSC earlier today that gas and coal generated about the same amount of electricity last spring. And that's pretty rare. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, it hasn't happened in a really long time. So there's still a fair amount of coal generation out there, but natural gas is certainly catching up. A lot of it's being driven by the availability of natural gas and the attractive sort of stable pricing aspect of it. And certainly the coal retirements that are being promulgated by the EPA is contributing to this as well. You also see a fair amount of nuclear. And one of the things you'll notice when you look at Pennsylvania's energy mix is that it's about 20% higher on nuclear than the rest of the country. So that was one of my kind of interesting takeaways from this one. And the other is we're a little behind on gas. And that's kind of interesting because we're sitting on the second largest natural gas find in the world, and yet we're only generating 20% of our power with natural gas. So we have some work to do, and industry is certainly stepping up to do that. You see here a list of some of the merchant power players that are looking to site new power plants in this state. You can see a pretty diverse spread of counties and sizes. And many of these projects will be bidding into the PJM auction that's coming up next week. It's a base residual auction that looks at power needs out into 2016 and 2017. And what they kind of communicated to the market is there's a need. There's a need for power, as much as 2,000 megawatts of power in that time frame. So this is an auction with a 3-year time horizon, and you can just see some of the players that are lining up that hopefully are going to move the needle on power generation here in Pennsylvania. One of the reasons, as I mentioned, that natural gas is really taking off in terms of the demand market for natural gas is just the sheer economics of natural gas relative to other fuels and other options for power generation. So what I'm showing here on this slide is looking out into 2017, the same time frame for the current PJM auction. You can see the levelized cost for the options that are out there for new generation. And this is kind of my no-brainer slide, all right? Natural gas is a no-brainer, especially here in Pennsylvania when you have so much gas available. It really changes the dependence on pipelines. You don't have to have supply in the Gulf of Mexico anymore. You don't have to bring it in from Texas or Louisiana. It's right here. You're literally building power plants right on the wellhead, which is pretty exciting. But you know, south of 6 cents a kilowatt hour compared to really, you know, the coal options really don't look all that attractive anymore. The only real coal plants that we're really seeing proposed now are sort of coal gasification or kind of clean coal projects, which are interesting, but they're expensive. And then as you look on down the list, you get into wind and solar and nuclear and biomass. They're all just a lot more expensive than gas. So there's certainly value in having a mix of fuels, and you've seen that with the national pie chart, with the Pennsylvania pie chart, but certainly as you look at decisions for new generation going forward, it's really hard to ignore natural gas. I mentioned the PJM. They're a pretty important stakeholder. ANGA has a lot of engagement with PJM and really with all of the organized markets around the country. These guys sort of set the market rules for the way power moves in a pretty broad region. They encompass 13 states and the District of Columbia. And they're an important stakeholder because they're sort of shaping decisions about investments. And they're determining for that region where are the reliability concerns, where do we need new generation, where does it make more sense to solve the problem of transmission, what kind of balance do we have in terms of the fuels that we use. So a very important stakeholder and certainly a big part of our engagement and outreach. Another reason besides economics is natural gas is cleaner than other fossil fuels. You can see on average we're about 50% lower on CO2, so that's a pretty big deal. And so this is kind of the other big selling point with natural gas. Not only are we cheaper, but we're cleaner too. Again, hard to ignore. In fact, we're at a 20-year low right now on CO2 emissions. So you have to go all the way back to 1994 to really look at a level of CO2 emissions that is consistent with where we are today. And so a lot of the targets that we set for ourselves for reducing our emissions and improving greenhouse gas emissions and such, we're coming in so far under those targets that we're having to reset the targets. And a lot of this is being driven by more use of natural gas, particularly for power generation relative to other fossil fuels. The other big market I want to talk about is industrial. Certainly we are seeing a pretty significant renaissance in industrial and manufacturing markets in this country. We have a whole list of case studies that we're kind of looking at for an ad campaign we're having this year called Think About It, where we're going to look at case studies with industrial type customers, farmers, transit authorities, you name it, and really kind of highlight some of the success stories that are out there that natural gas is providing. And these are just some of the companies that are really kind of leading the charge. So whether it's a U.S. Steel pipe mill, I'm going to mention the ethylene cracker that certainly is being talked about here in Pennsylvania. Nucor in Louisiana, Governor Jindal called it the largest industrial project in Louisiana history. And the Nucor folks will tell you that natural gas is a big part of the reason why they're doing that project. It's about a $3 billion project, and will create at least 1,000 jobs, if not more. Wanted to mention just some of the more natural gas intensive industries that are out there. On average, if you look at the manufacturing sector, energy costs are really pretty low, surprisingly low, in terms of the costs that go into manufacturing a product. Natural gas is really low on average, but some industries are very intensive users of natural gas. And I've got some of the examples here. Certainly nitrogen fertilizer, plastic materials, which is kind of what the ethylene cracker is going to feed, resins, alkalines, chlorine, glass. All of these are real heavy users of natural gas, and these are the ones that are really leading the renaissance right now because they're benefiting the most from natural gas price savings. We're seeing jobs come back to the U.S. from other countries. Again, a lot of capital investment, very exciting stuff. This is just the announcement on the Shell plant here. I believe they delayed their decision a little more. This is a pretty huge investment, so you can't blame them for doing their due diligence. But certainly an ethylene cracker here. Hopefully we'll get a positive announcement in 2014, and this project will move forward. But again, this plant will use natural gas to produce ethylene, which is a valuable raw material in the manufacture of plastics. So I mentioned that being a pretty large user of natural gas. So this is a very exciting project. This could be just countless jobs, both directly at the plant and also indirectly. We've seen numbers as high as 20,000 new jobs, direct, induced, and indirect, with a project of this magnitude. And finally, I'll mention just our supply chain for unconventional gas. We're making a big difference around the economy, sure, but some of the industries that sort of feed into natural gas are also seeing a big renaissance as a result of the work that we're doing. Certainly on the steel side, right now we're at kind of a pre-2009 peak for steel demand. When all the big pipeline projects were being built at the sort of onset of the shale revolution, steel was kind of off the charts, really hot. And so now you're seeing it kind of come back to that level again. And a lot of this is being driven by natural gas development. Certainly sand, which is an important part of our production process, is also at kind of an all-time high. I think it exceeded $1 billion in 2010. So again, that's another big one. And then the trucking industry. We're looking at this in a lot of ways, from supply trucks to heavy-duty trucks that use our product in lieu of diesel. So lots of ways we're impacting the trucking industry. But these are just a few examples in our supply chains of industries that are being impacted by natural gas. And that concludes my remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Tony now, and I guess we'll take your questions at the end. So thank you.